I'm delighted today to be joined by Professor Angela Hill, who's the Deputy Vice-Chancellor Education at Edith Cowan University. Angela's interests, of course, have been in relation to practice-based learning, including service learning and higher education policy and things, but also has a real interest in the area of access and equity in education, including the pedagogies and the policies around inclusion and things. So this little series, we're going to be talking about this notion of digital equity. And so, Angela, using technology to enhance learning opportunities has become, kind of mainstream now in higher education. But what challenges does that lead to for our students?
Thanks, Michael, and thanks for the opportunity. And I'd probably just start by acknowledging it's NAIDOC week and a bit delayed due to COVID, but however, I just acknowledge the traditional owners here, the Noongar people, and pay my respects to elders past and present. We've got an exciting array of activities for NAIDOC week here, as I'm sure many universities have. Yeah. Look, what are the challenges and opportunities? I think the challenges and opportunities are pretty much the same as the challenges and opportunities we have for any pedagogy curriculum initiative that we have in the sector. So as a critical educator, I think I always start with the question, in whose interests are the use of these technologies? And do they make the difference we intend? And how do we know? Mm-hmm. So I think you think about many activities that we refer to as mainstream, ensuring communication skills are taught and assessed, embedding Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives, internationalising the curriculum, employability initiatives across the curriculum. And I think that in all these areas, we have to focus our attention on doing this work with an intentionality and a focus on research-informed approach to deployment and an eye to collecting data and evidence about who is benefiting. Yeah. So I think that's where I always start as a critical educator, thinking about in whose interests is the use of technology and how do we know it's making the difference we intend.
Yeah, okay. I mean, typically we've heard a lot over the years about digital literacy. But now we're starting to hear this term digital equity coming in a lot more.
Yeah.
What do you see as being the two differences or the main difference between these thoughts?
I think digital equity has actually been just talked about for quite a long time. You look back in the literature and I think you can see back to 2006, 2007, there were papers that talked about digital equity. But I think when we talk about digital literacy, what we're talking about is one of the core capabilities we need now, general capability to support living, learning, working in the digital world and the knowledge economy. So when I think about digital literacy, I know here at ECU we have a focus on understanding how we use an array of technologies. I think we need to understand our digital footprint, how to be digitally safe, how to use technology ethically. So when I think about digital literacy, it's really in that it's a core capability that we need to embed in our curriculum. When I think about digital equity, this is just the focus on inclusion and not, when I shouldn't say just the focus, it is the core focus. And I think digital equity asks us to consider to what extent can our students access and effectively use the technology necessary. And also, more importantly, I think, is the deployment relevant and useful for their diverse worlds? So I think digital equity also has a focus on participatory action. Does it actually promote greater participation and success? And I think front of mind for me at the moment is also notions of digital equity when it comes to staff and how staff are afforded opportunities to engage in thinking through the skills that they need, but also thinking through what access they have as well. And I think that became very clear during the COVID situation this year.
Yeah. So what are some of the newer ways? I mean, now that technology is evolving a bit more and we've got these newer tools are evolving, what are some of the newer ways you see digital equity being addressed at Edith Cowan, for example?
Well, I think what we're seeing is that increasingly it's just a multifaceted, all-in approach to raising our collective consciousness around what we understand by access for students and preparedness of students and preparedness of educators. And I think during COVID, for example, here at ECU, the issue of access access to technology became really very critical very quickly. And I think for really different communities at ECU, we had to have a different approach. So we were lucky here in Western Australia, we were able to keep our e-labs open, and there was pressure to close them at one point, but we really decided that they were essential because we saw students using them to capacity, even though it was a reduced capacity to the physical distance due to the physical distancing. But students needed to come on campus to access Wi-Fi. And then we needed to have a very quickly deployed laptop loan scheme. We simply did not have enough hardware on campus for students. We had to have more access, and we started very quickly a laptop loan scheme. Interestingly, we had real trouble purchasing enough laptops because of the hard border close, and we had to compete, and we were paying an enormous price for laptops just to get enough for our students, and also provided them with dongles. And our assumptions about the way that students could borrow the laptops and the length of time they needed them for, they were thrown out the window. We certainly got some very clear feedback from our Aboriginal students that they wanted laptop loans of at least a month. And we had started with much shorter time. So that access to hardware was really critical. We also knew that we had to really quickly upskill students in the use of a range of tools, particularly students who were not using online learning or were only using the LMS in very minimal ways previously in their face-to-face learning. And so we deployed a virtual assistants students, we trained students, and we really, they were very popular in terms of supporting students. We've already had a student workforce, but we expanded them. And I think that what I really noticed most of all was supporting our campuses that weren't in Australia. So, for example, Sri Lanka, where the cohort of students is quite young, school leavers, very used to face-to-face learning. We had to do a lot of work with the educators there. We did a lot of late night training sessions looking at supporting those students and staff understand how to use the LMS and then how to adapt the, I guess, the contextualization activities that normally happen face-to-face in an online environment. So it was a really great case study, I think, of digital equity, because the access to the technology, the access to the expertise, the access to thinking about whether the content's relevant, it was really a very profound study in what digital equity is all about.
Cool. So that, I mean, we've done quite a bit. Most universities around Australia have done heaps with this COVID thing, but what else could we do now as we come out the other end? What else could we do, do you think?
Look, we're at a juncture here at ECU. We're looking at our current LMS. We're thinking about the ways forward. My sense is that we need to really sharply turn our attention to investing in training of staff. We also need to continue our engagement with students about what works and what doesn't work. We are focused here on trying to hear students. We've run a lot of forums to understand concerns, for example, about online assessments, etc. But critically, we need to, I think, focus on the skills that educators need to deploy these tools well. I think we also need to do a bit more of a deep dive analysis on the ways that people are actually engaging with these tools and review our attempts at universal access, because I think that universal design principles, I know that we pay more than lip service here, but we really need to push that very hard, I think, in the future. And I often think about the scale of our investment in technologies and think about the competing priorities now and very sharply in focus after COVID, and think about what's the impact we want to make. So I think that we do have a lot of thinking to do. I also see a real nexus between our focus here on building assessment literacy for staff and students, digital literacy, and digital equity. So that nexus between assessment and learning technologies and the ways in which they come together in often unintended ways, and what we need to be thinking more about that.
Yeah. I mean, it's a little bit off track, but you're building a new building down in the middle of the city. Where do considerations of digital equity come into that kind of thing?
Oh, well, look, we had a fascinating conversation last week with RMIT about their learnings from the inner city. And really, really acutely, really important learnings about international students who might be attracted to a city campus. And what we found here at ECU during COVID was that many of our international students were the ones that were coming on campus still, or the ones that needed the laptop loans. But if thinking about the accommodation that they might be afforded in the city, where they may not have enough space to study, and the expanded need for potentially hardware and software and the hardware on campus just to support them. But we're also trying to make the city campus a really accessible. Our principal one in the design of that city campus is inclusive and accessible. So thinking about the ways in which we create a campus where students can access the digital technologies is going to be huge. We're sort of in this reading about the high flex opportunities and all of that, but I think at the moment we're probably going to try and leverage the city infrastructure as well, but also do things like look to have EduRoam available on the train line between our two main campuses. So we're trying to think of ways that students can have an always-on experience.
Yeah, cool. So just in wrapping this up, what are the words of encouragement might you have in relation to digital equity for us?
Well, I think we have to say this week there's always potential for hope, and we do need to look around and out. And I think always assume that our reality with learning technologies is just that, ours, and our TEL strategies need to really be grounded in principles and access inclusion. I think that's our first principle, and that's what we're going to be sticking with at ECU.
Yeah, cool. Well, thanks so much, Angela. It's been great talking with you.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks again.